Good morning, everybody. Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet on Thursday the 16th of March from the Walton Suite in the Winchester Guildhall. The time is 9:30 a.m. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Leader of the Council. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel, and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on and advice on how to turn these on is set out on our website. Can I remind everyone to ensure that mobile phones are on silent, and can I remind members to use their microphones? And in the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Please can I welcome members of TACT to the meeting this morning, and we will invite you forward when it is time to make a contribution. Turning to the agenda, the first item on the agenda is apologies for absence. I don't believe we have any apologies for absence. The second item on the agenda is membership of Cabinet committees and Cabinet appointments. We are asked to nominate a director of the St John's Winchester charity until February 2026. We have two nominations, Councillor Horrell and Councillor Lerney. I would propose that we put forward Councillor Lerney to continue in that role. Cabinet, you agreed?
Yeah.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is disclosure of interests. I need to declare a personal non-prejudicial interest as a member of the County Council. I believe, Councillor Porter, do you have a...
Just to say the same thing, personal but non-prejudicial interest.
Do we have any other declarations of interest on the matters in front of us today? The next item on the agenda is a request to note any requests from councillors to make representations on an agenda item. I have Councillor Horrell wishing to speak on items 7 and 9, and Councillor Godfrey wishing to speak on item 8. Is Councillor Godfrey here? He's on his way. Okay, well, I'll assume that I'll call you when we get to that point. In terms of public participation, I have notes that David Chafe and David Light from TACT would like to speak on item 7. Good. The next item is leader and cabinet member announcements. I wish to quickly announce that a week ago today, I signed a joint pledge with Southampton City Council, the leaders of Southampton City Council and representatives from Eastleigh and Test Valley Borough Councils and the leader of Hampshire County Council, with the University of Southampton, with a joint civic university agreement. This looks to widen and deepen our relationship, both with our neighbours and also with the university, on 6 priority areas that we've agreed between each other in the areas of opportunities for education and new skills, reducing inequality, generating jobs and economic growth, sustainability, and investing in arts and culture. The Winchester School of Art has been in the heart of our city for more than 150 years, and the University of Southampton has been with us for nearly 30. We already really value the university's cultural, creative, and economic contribution to our city's life. This is a very exciting opportunity that's a very exciting opportunity presented by this new civic agreement, and I think will bring new energy to a wide range of further areas where we can do much more together to benefit the people both of our city and of our district. Colleagues, are there any other announcements? Councillor Lerney.
Thank you, Leader. Over the next few weeks, residents will see a Volvo electric bus whizzing around Winchester. Working with Stagecoach, we've brought the bus in for 4 weeks to evaluate its performance on the park and ride bus routes prior to the renewal of the park and ride bus contract next year. Not only are electric buses greener, being lower carbon emitting, but cleaner, helping us meet our air quality goals, and quieter, improving the experience of being in our city centre. So this is a good first step to us having a wider introduction of electric buses in our city.
Thank you, Councillor Lerney. Any other announcements? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Leader. Just thought that as this is the last meeting of Cabinet before the coronation of King Charles III takes place, I thought everyone would appreciate a quick update on arrangements that the City Council have put in place. I'm very pleased to tell you that the bunting has been ordered, so we can ensure that our city centre will look well dressed and resplendent in union-themed flags to celebrate this momentous occasion. I'd also like to place on record our thanks to Winchester Bid for their generous contribution towards the flags and bunting. In addition, we've given our market towns an £800 grant to enable them to celebrate this historic occasion in style, and we are working with our partners and the Cathedral, who are also live streaming the event. Applications for road closures are still being welcomed, and given the timescale now, with dates coming up soon, if residents still want to apply for their road to be closed, they need to do it sooner rather than later. And there are tips on the website to enable them to do this, and also tips on how to run an event in terms of keeping it safe. I'm sure we're all really looking forward to what will be a memorable weekend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Any other announcements? On to the next item of business. The paper we have in front of us is to establish a local housing company. Deputy Leader, could you introduce the paper?
Thank you, Leader. In December last year, Cabinet took the decision to move forward with the establishment of a wholly owned housing company, having examined in considerable detail the benefits this would bring in terms of meeting one of the 5 key priorities for this council to provide homes for all, allowing the council to provide a greater range of tenures within the housing market to meet what we know is an unmet need for affordable, high quality, energy efficient, secure accommodation within the rented sector. And in terms of the early opportunity to lease to the company 41 one-bedroom units at the new Winnell Flats development, which are due to be finished in October, November this year, meeting a commitment made to the community there to diversify the type of tenure. It's important to stress that the housing company will sit alongside the council's current social housing offer, and the council retains its commitment to continue to provide additional new homes for social rent. This paper sets out the next steps that need to be agreed in order for the housing company to be set up in an orderly and timely manner so that it's fully operational in time for the Winnell Flats handover, as I said, in late October, early November this year. It doesn't supersede the presentation of the strategic and final business case that will be brought to Cabinet Housing in July and then go on to full council thereafter. What it does do is make a number of recommendations. It sets out what the company name will be, and the name proposed is Venter Living. This is being recommended as it reflects the Roman name for Winchester, which was Venter Bargorum. We feel that it's a distinctive name, but one that is firmly rooted in our beautiful district. It also sets out recommendations to agree the draft Articles of Association that will allow the company to be registered and established, to agree the shareholders' agreement that incorporates reserve matters that will ensure that the council, as the sole shareholder, retains control over the activities of the company, to agree the appointment of directors, including the recruitment of 2 independent directors who can bring expertise to the company, to enable the company to have time to put together the final business case, which will come forward in July, as I've already said. And also to allow the strategic director with resourcing responsibility to enter into a contract with the company for the provision of services. While the paper clearly states that the housing company will remain dormant until that final business case has been approved, I would like to stress that a considerable amount of preparatory work is ongoing to ensure the housing company will be a success once the decision is made. This is including the preparation of the papers today, the shareholders' agreement, the Articles of Association, the early preparation of a draft lease, the training for staff and preparation of marketing materials for the Winnell Flats, to ensure that when these do come onto the market, they'll meet that need that we know is out there, with some work ongoing with the NHS, so that key workers will have an early sight of their availability. And I would like to thank all the officers who've been involved in that work and the ongoing work. I am pleased today that we have Mr. Chafe, Mr. Light, and actually Mrs. Mellish with us from TACT. We have talked through the paper with them in some detail, as they rightly have a very keen interest in the housing company. Because while the HRA may lease assets to the housing company, as indeed the General Fund may as well, in so doing with the Winnell Flats, the HRA will be the one to retain ownership of those properties and will benefit from the release payments made by the housing company. I hope that Cabinet colleagues will support these recommendations today for the timely setting up of the housing company. But we have Gillian Knight, Corporate Head of Housing, Simon Maggs from the New Homes team, who's been instrumental in driving this project forward, Simon Hendy in the room with us as well, and also Neil MacArthur, and we'll be happy to answer any questions colleagues have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. So the at this point, it'd be very helpful if Mr. Chafe and Mr. Light, if you have any comments that you wish to make, if you could come forward and make those comments.
Thank you, Leader. We had a briefing on this final paper on Tuesday, and the original paper went to TACT some time back and everything was explained. And we now fully understand how this setup is to happen and how the company will work. And the main benefit is that it serves a purpose to provide people that don't fall into various categories to have a home and make it easier for them to have either a short time there or a longer time and the benefit of all. So that the main thing is that we fully support it and really want to say, please get on with it and put it into use and make it work. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chafe. And now, Councillor Horrible, I believe you wish to make some comments.
Chair, good morning, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'm sure, given you know my interest in the housing company, I'm delighted to see the paper here this morning, and I welcome the move to establish a housing company in advance of the Winnell Flats being completed. In fact, the timing is clearly tight, so the early progress being recommended today to avoid new homes remaining empty is very positive. And the company, always the spirit in which we thought about establishing a housing company was to give us another opportunity for a housing alternative offer to residents in our district keen to move into the marketplace. So this is a very positive offer to sit alongside our own HRA offer and others commercially available. Chair, though I have a number of questions this morning arising from the document that I'm sure officers would be able to help me with. The first of those, if the council provides services to the new company as recommended under an agreement that would be formed, how can we guarantee the level of service is acceptable to the company if the construct means that the sole shareholder for the company is the council? How do officers balance HRA work and work for the housing company if, as suggested in the document, employment contracts are not amended? How does that work across both entities? If the business case has a need to look at a different length of lease for the properties currently recommended 15 years, and clearly we don't have a business case yet, can this be discussed further? Is there an option for a different length of lease? And if the company cannot make the business plan work based on some of the initiatives detailed in the Cabinet report that have already started discussions, such as the One Public Estate Key Worker Housing Initiative, are the housing company at liberty, when they put the business plan finally to council for approval, to come up with a different approach? I welcome the initiative for 2 independent directors, but what is the specific plan for their recruitment? They're clearly very important people who would bring, hopefully, good market knowledge to the company and be able to help us all on a path. And can the officers confirm how any of the profit contributions will be made to the benefit of the HRA as we go along through the course of the journey with the company, or indeed at the closure of the company at some point in the future? And also, Chair, finally, what would make us dissolve the company at some point in the future? What would be that trigger if we felt that was the appropriate route to take? But Chair, overall, you'll know that I'm very keen that we progress. I hope these are matters of detail that I've raised this morning, and happy to hear responses from the officer team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Horrell. Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Leader. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Light, speaking on behalf of TACT, for your support for the housing company for this paper today. So thank you very much for that. Councillor Horrell, I've written down 7. I hope I've got the right number. I just wanted to address the business case questions, which were questions 3 and 4. The paper makes it very clear that the business case will come forward to Cabinet Housing, then on to full council. And within that, the company will be putting forward its business case for that year. Now, if it comes forward with proposals are slightly different to what we envisaged, then we'll be evaluating those, because obviously the company will want to put forward a business case that can work. Now, as a sole shareholder, we need to make sure it works for them, and it also works for us in terms of the objectives we're setting out for the company. So I feel that until we see that business case, we don't know what they'll bring forward, but it will be that discussion and review of it. And again, the paper makes it clear that that goes to Cabinet Housing. We would expect 3 directors to be there, and we will be looking at that very closely. So that was whether or not the 15 years, maybe they might come back with something different. We would have to look at that. You also said, you know, if they came forward with a different plan, again, it states in the paper that we would evaluate that different business case and establish whether we're happy to go forward with it. So questions 3 and 4, I think, are covered. Then there were some specifics. I don't know who wants to cover the first one. Provide services. How do we guarantee the level of services acceptable to the company if there's a conflict, if the council's providing those? Mr. Hendy, did you, or Mrs. Knight, who's going? Mr. Hendy?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. Shall I take that? The paper makes the point that one of the recommendations is to delegate the ability to enter into resourcing contract, which will cover the services provided by the council to the company. And clearly the company will want to assure itself, the directors of the company, that it's receiving the right level and quality of service under that resourcing contract. One of the reasons why we brought and structured the paper as we have at the moment is because there is the danger of a conflict of interest in terms of council nominees providing services within the council and selling them to the company. And hopefully the way this is now structured, it resolves that potential conflict. And as the deputy leader has already said, a business plan could be proposed to the council that in some instances doesn't include the council providing those services. At the outset, clearly it's in the council's and the company's interests where it's been set up that arrangement does exist, because it provides the company an early and reliable source of services in the first year of operation.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The second question related to balancing officers' workload between the HRA and the housing company. I know in the paper it says that the housing company would almost have to acquire those services from the council. But Mrs. Knight, are you going to cover that one?
Yes, we have over the last 18 months introduced a home ownership team, and that is to deal with the increased tenure that we are building through the development team around shared ownership and outright ownership. And so we had an eye to the housing company at the same time, and last year we asked for additional resource within the home ownership team to assist with the delivery of the 41 homes as we set up. Ongoing, it will merge into our normal tenancy services team. And so we don't see that there will be a problem initially with balancing the work between managing those tenancies and other tenancies. It's a slightly different skill, so there will be training involved, and we will have some assistance initially to set the tenancies up. But we do feel the balance is there to promote the service.
Thank you, Mrs. Knight, and I believe that training is already underway in that area. The fifth question, as I've covered 3 and 4, was the independent director support for their recruitment, but clarity around plans for how we will go about that. Mr. Hendy?
Yes, thank you, Leader. So the normal process would be to, as with any recruitment, to draw up some job descriptions and some personal specifications for the directors and offer that to the market. And you'll be aware of a number of local authority companies already exist in this field. So I can assure you, I'm sure we can find examples of director posts and personal specifications that would be applicable in these instances. We give you some comfort that we could recruit some quality individuals to the company.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy. And again, I welcome this paper to give us time to do that effectively. The 6th question was around a profit contribution and the use of profit from the company for the benefit to the HRA. Again, in the shareholders agreement and in the papers, it does set out that the company, any profits would be used to benefit the objectives of the company. I wondered who wanted to cover that profit share element.
Shall I do that again? Yes, the leader. As I set out in the shareholders agreement, we were part of the annual business plan that the company would propose back to the council. Clearly, as the council as shareholder, if the company does make a surplus and wants to issue a dividend, that would be within the rights of the council to consider that. But as the deputy leaders also said, the council might want to support the company to reinvest any surplus generated in other activities that would promote the business of the company.
Thank you. And then the final question, Councillor Horan, I hope I haven't missed any, was what would make us want to dissolve the company? Again, you know, we will be looking at an annual business plan. That business plan has to be workable. So we'll be looking each year at that annual business plan. And obviously that element of the company has to be a viable entity in its own right. So it may be the directors come forward and say it's no longer workable, but I wondered who'd like to give a little more detail on what issues, if any, more than I've said. Mr. Hendy, is it you?
Just some clarification on the question. I was trying to write them down before and I didn't get to that one. What was the specific question?
Councillor Horrell, I believe it was what would make us want to dissolve the company? What factors?
If the company is successfully trading and achieving its objectives, it's difficult to understand why the council would want to wind up the company. I think the important thing to say is the council has the control under the shareholders agreement to do that if it so wishes. There could be a variety of reasons, I suppose, but it's difficult at this point in time to think if it was achieving, which if we sort of distill down what's happening here is if you're minded to support this, you're setting up a company to do something for you, but you have control in terms of what they do. You're giving them the ability of how it's being done within the confines of an annual business plan. So the control does rest with the council quite considerably in terms of what's happening here.
Thank you, Mr. Hendy. And of course, we are at the point of setting up this housing company. We have support both from TACT, from the opposition across the council, and we are looking and doing our due diligence for the greatest effect to make sure that we give this company every opportunity to succeed. And this is what this paper does. It sets out what we do now to ensure that the establishment goes ahead smoothly and the company is in a good place to bring forward a sustainable business plan which will allow us to move forward with our objectives. Thank you, Councillor Horrell.
Thank you, Deputy Leader. Cabinet, do you have any questions on this paper? Councillor Power.
Thank you, Leader. I think this concern about tensions between the level of service required by the housing company and the resources within the HRA to meet those needs is valid. I would expect to see a service level agreement in place to document the funding to be expected, and that allows the HRA to resource accordingly. Is that a normal way of rolling out support for a housing company?
Mr. Hendy.
Thank you, Chair. The report makes the recommendation that a resourcing contract, so a formal contract between the council and the company, which is a separate legal entity, would be in place. Normal process would be that resourcing contract will set out the services provided by the council to the company, costed, given the ability for the council to sell services over and above those services that are demarcated within the agreement. And clearly the council wants to make sure, well, it says in the paper, that the costs of those services provided by the council are covered plus some as well.
Councillor Poulter.
Thank you. This sort of arrangement is not original in the sense that there are lots of other organisations and other councils that do something similar. Are there any lessons that we've learned from any of those that we think is particularly valid here?
I don't know, Mr. Hendy, whether you want to speak or whether Mr. Maggs wants to speak, and he's done quite a lot of work in this area.
Thank you, Councillor. We're talking regularly to other local authorities about the approach they've taken. So we're talking to the likes of Eastleigh, talking to Test Valley about their experience in this world. So we're learning a lot about operational matters and about strategic matters as part of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? In terms of risk management, is the legal structure that we're setting up, is it the memorandum and articles and all the other papers, are they broadly consistent with what other people have done? Are they sort of relatively straightforward, off the shelf, no surprises in terms of how they're set up?
Thank you, Leader. We have taken external legal advice, but I believe Mr. MacArthur, if you'd like to give some reassurance.
Yes, thank you. The documentation you've got has been drafted for us by external solicitors who are very experienced in setting up local authority companies, and in fact, part of the reason we instructed them was that they were, they've been advising Winchester on this subject for some time. In and amongst all the legal complexity, these are very standard documents that Trowers and Hamlins have helped us draft, and I think very similar to the memorandums and articles of association that you'd see in lots of companies of this sort.
Thank you. Cabinet, any other questions on this paper? Any debate? Councillor Lurney.
Thank you, Leader. I think this has been a long time coming, but I think it's been worth taking the time to get this right. I think this is important in meeting our pledges for Homes for All. While the traditional council housing offer is very important to us, it's quite clear that there's a segment of society that we really haven't been serving well in this area, particularly down to the affordability issues. In addition, moving forward with the housing company allows us to fulfil some of the pledges we made to people in Winnell when we came forward with the new flat proposal in terms of how we would be tenanting or selling those flats. So I think this is very welcome, and I'm very keen to support it.
Thank you, Councillor Lurney. Any other debate? Councillor Porter.
Thank you. So often we hear that when people are renting, they also have to move their children if they have to move house or home. And these sort of tenancies are going to be absolutely invaluable. Not the first site, because these are for single people, but long term, this has the real potential to make really great differences for families. So I'm really pleased that we're making the effort today to set up the infrastructure so that we're ready to take on the first 41 properties, but there is every hope that this will grow. And when it does, assuming it will do, when it does, I think this will make a real difference for people in Winchester, and it will also enable younger families to stay here, as well as those that are lucky enough to get a council home. So I'm always very proud to say that about just under 10% of the homes in Winchester District are actually council homes. And I'm hoping that from this, we'll have another 10% long term that will be endorsed as homes that Winchester City Council give tenancies for. That would be an amazing achievement if we're looking at living well in Winchester District.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Porter. Deputy Leader, any final thoughts?
Thank you, Leader. No, not really. Just to again thank Cabinet colleagues for their support, to thank officers for the detailed work that's gone into this. I think what this paper shows is that we are doing everything we can to make sure that the housing company is a success, will be a success. Obviously, we have to wait for that final business case in July, but the objectives are clear, as Councillor Lurney has set out for us, and I set out when I introduced the paper. We do have that commitment to provide homes for all, we do know that we are a very responsible landlord who will be in it for the long term. And through the housing company, when people do move into their new homes, yes, they will be private rented in the first instance for the Winnell flats. But they will know that if all goes well, they'll be able to stay in those high quality, energy efficient, affordable homes for as long as they actually want to. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm also absolutely delighted that we've got this paper to this point. I think it's fantastic news that we're extending the housing offer that's available to people in our district, and that more people will have access to high quality homes, low carbon and hence low bill, and the high quality management that we already offer to our tenants. And I'd like to thank Deputy Leader and the officers for all their careful work to bring the paper and the proposals and the plan to this point. In terms of the recommendations in front of us, let me quickly outline what we are seeking to agree here today. So we're agreeing the proposed draft shareholder agreement and the memorandum and articles, I would guess, Appendix B, Mem and Arts, for those who like to use abbreviations. Subject to agreeing the shareholder agreement and the memorandum of articles, agree that in consultation with the Strategic Director of Resources, the Corporate Head of Asset Management, the Corporate Head of Finance, we authorise the Strategic Director with housing responsibility to establish a council-owned housing company for the purposes set out in CAB 3366, an earlier paper. Approving the company name as Venta Living, approving the appointment of company directors, the strategic director for non-housing responsibility, and 2 councillors with below those nominations were reviewed after a year, and also agreeing to authorise the corporate head of housing to advertise and recruit up to 2 independent and remunerated directors with the requisite skills to the board. Authorising the strategic director who has housing responsibility to enter into a resourcing contract with the local housing company, subject to an agreed business plan to provide services to the company. Authorising the strategic director with housing responsibility in consultation with the strategic director for resources, the MO, and the deputy leader, and the cabinet member for community and housing to finalise details of the draft articles of association and shareholder agreement, and to note that full council will consider and agree the reserved matters in the shareholder agreement. Cabinet, are you agreed?
Agreed.
The next item on the agenda is the risk management policy, but I note that Councillor Godfrey, who wanted to speak on that, is not here. So shall we perhaps do the item of afterwards, which is the Q3 performance and monitoring report, and then hopefully Councillor Godfrey will make it here in time. Can I also thank the representatives from TACT and the officers who worked on the housing paper, as they're currently leaving, but thank them for their contribution. So if nobody minds, well, even if you do mind, I suggest we move to the Q3 finance and performance monitoring report. This is a report we all know well. It outlines it's got a lot in there. It's got a narrative overview of the progress that we're making against the priorities of the council plan. It has an update on the financial situation that we're in, including general fund and the HRA. It has an overview of performance against key performance indicators. and an update on our key projects. Before it got to us, it has gone through both the performance panel and scrutiny. There's a lot of good stuff in here. It provides an update on what we're doing on the cost of living, what we've been doing to support Ukrainian families. There's an awful lot in there about our activity on the environment, the Retrofit Ready programme, solar panels, a reference to the electric bus that Councillor Lurley referred to in her announcements, the work in the local plan. There's a lot in there about the work on Pride in Place, the work on antisocial behaviour, the joint working with other authorities, the new plans for CCTV, the extra bike parking. We've just had a discussion about housing. There's an update on as at the end of the previous quarter of the 118 houses under construction, and the fact that we were tendering the Micheldever passive house pilot. We can all safely report that that tender has gone through, and indeed a few of us were up at Micheldever the other day in quite appalling weather, watching the ground being broken. So lots of good things in here, Cabinet. I don't propose to go through it in all in great detail, but there will be a chance to discuss it later on, any key points you wish to highlight. But before then, Councillor Horrell, you wanted to make a deputation on this paper.
Chair, thank you once again for allowing me to speak to Cabinet this morning. And as you say, this has been well trailed, having been discussed, the papers discussed at the performance panel on the 15th of February and then on to scrutiny. And we're grateful to you, Leader, for attending the panel session, which allowed us to have a dialogue about some of the questions that we had at the time, which were pre-submitted by panel members. So that was very helpful on that occasion. Thank you. The minutes have been drafted from scrutiny, where we raised the discussion took place at scrutiny about two particular items. One was the request from the panel for the Cabinet to look at one or two of the new key performance indicators that are being used against the revised council plan. And I am working with Mr. Howson at the moment to just clarify some of those requests. We agreed with you, Chair, that we would not add onerously to the measures that were being collected, but it did transpire that there were some already in the system that could be used in the paper, and also some comparisons over time that we thought were helpful. So we're working on that, Chair, with a view to coming back to you and your Cabinet colleagues to see if you would slightly amend the key performance indicators, and doing that in a constructive way. The other element is that we have discussed with the Chair of Scrutiny a meeting with the Strategic Director, Mrs. Evans, who is now taking responsibility for the work of the performance panel, to look at how we review pre-submitted questions, on the basis that last time there was some confusion about the submission of questions and the timing of that. And we're scheduled, Mrs. Evans is organising for us to have that discussion, so that when you go into the new year, we'll be in a position to better understand how we do that most effectively. Chair, I hope that's helpful to you and the Cabinet in terms of where we are, an update on the work that's before you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Horrell, and we are indeed very grateful for the work that scrutiny and performance panel colleagues put into reviewing this report in great detail and asking a large number of probing but nonetheless less useful questions. to myself and to officers at the meeting that reviews this paper. Speaking of probing but useful questions, Cabinet, do you have any questions that you wish to ask on this? I'm expecting that you're all very close to the facts and figures that relate to your own area. But if there is anything you'd like to ask, then please let me know. Are there any particular points you wish to highlight or mention? Any debate? We're being asked to note progress and endorse the report. I'd be surprised if there was anybody that didn't want to do that. But I wondered if anybody wanted to highlight any particular areas of progress, or if you're happy just to take the report as read so we can crack on and move to the risk register. I'm hearing that people are very happy with the report as in its current form, all the progress that it shows. Cabinet, we're being asked to note the progress achieved during Q3, which of course is in the municipal year, I think, which refers to October, November, December 2022, and endorse the contents of the report. Cabinet, are you agreed to do that?
Agreed.
Good, that was easy. On to, so we will now go back to the risk management policy, which we reorganised, so that Councillor Godfrey could make some comments on it. And I'm pleased that that change in the agenda seems to have worked since Councillor Godfrey is now here. But before your comments, Councillor Power, would you like to introduce the paper? And would Mrs. Tranner like to come forward as this discussion of its contents?
Delighted. Thank you, Leader. I feel as if I've been talking risk management ever since I became a councillor. The changes to this policy are detailed in 12.9 and reflected in the risk policy. Most notably are risk appetite, which I think we are all happy with. Now, the purpose of the risk policy is to contextualise our risk appetite, and that caused some confusion at scrutiny. But perhaps the most important purpose is to allow officers to assess how best to identify risk of a change in what we do or how we do it against the council's risk appetite. And that starts on page 88 of the risk of your papers. Now, there was some discussion at scrutiny about potential confusion, and we have made some changes. I took the opportunity to talk to Councillor Bolton, who made some very interesting comments at scrutiny about this paper. And we have made those changes to how we assess the risk appetite, and that starts on page 88 of our papers. Councillor Bolton still had concerns about whether that would work. So I took the opportunity to ask Mrs. Tranner to actually talk to officers, because officers are going to be the primary audience of this part of the paper. And officers felt that we should work with that it was workable and not confusing to officers. So my suggestion is that we roll this risk policy out as is and review in a year. But Mrs. Tranner can give more material on how officers felt this would go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Power. Yes, I have discussed this week with a number of service lead colleagues who did agree that the changes were clearer in the intention. I think what has become clear is that we will need to do some training, and this was already a consideration, but we will need to do some training with SLT colleagues over the next couple of months, just to make sure that everybody is understanding and there is a consistent approach to how we are applying the risk appetite. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Godfrey, would you like to come forward and make your deputation?
my apologies, my pin wasn't recognised. I'm very grateful, Mr. Chairman, for the kindness you were shown by delaying this item until I can arrive. Your indulgence could be even more enjoyed if you moved cabinet meetings, other meetings to outside the working day, and that would be even more helpful. I support a risk management strategy, having spent most of the last 45 years assessing and mitigating risk in my professional life. I have welcomed the development over the last few years of a clearer approach to managing the risks that the council has to deal with when making decisions and delivering services. However, I still have a real concern that raised by Councillor Bolton at Audit and Governance, of the good practices and intentions that this paper aspires to are either not properly understood or are being deliberately ignored. My misgivings centre around the risk appetite statement, where the Cabinet sets the cap on the level of risk that can be accepted while delivering the council plan. The overall risk appetite for council activities is moderate, with a greater appetite of open for tackling the climate emergency and delivering homes for all perfectly rational. The risk appetite statement provides clear guidance for officers to use when planning the delivery of a council plan. So it is acceptable for new homes team to proceed with risks that are highly likely to occur, but only have a moderate impact, or have a significant impact but are unlikely to happen, but not where the risk has a significant impact and is likely to happen. But this risk strategy is being ignored. The penultimate entry in the table at 12.9 expects that officers will be assessing their risk appetite, not set down by Cabinet, when a new activity is being planned. This is the wrong way round. The council, members of the council don't go into a restaurant and order a big slap-up meal and then work out how hungry they are. The decision on your appetite for food or risk must be made in advance of starting on a course of action, and then ensure that plans are in place to reduce any excess risk to within the acceptable range of the stated appetite. Now, this is the case with the corporate risks 004 listed in the paper, where the major risk of maintaining council services after an incident is planned to be reduced from unlikely to highly unlikely, which is within the stated appetite. But the strategy is being ignored in other key areas, where the risk is much higher than the stated risk appetite allows for, including most of the other listed corporate risks on this paper. Similarly, the recent Cabinet decision to proceed with the Central Winchester regeneration project, despite the highly likely financial risk of the council losing many millions of pounds in assets without any substantive mitigation. There is no evidence that this decision was taken using the risk management strategy or with any consideration of the council's risk appetite. What is the point of this risk strategy if it is not going to be used correctly? It is not for the officers to assess the appetite, but for the council, through the Cabinet, to set the risk appetite well in advance of any activity planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Godfrey. Is there a Councillor Godfrey? Is there a particular paragraph that you wish us to direct our attention to, just for clarity, so that we're?
That's right again. Yes, I refer to 12.9. There's a table in that section, and the penultimate entry refers to officers assessing the appetite, which is completely contrary to the intention of the approach.
Councillor Power, would you like to address the question asked?
Thank you, Leader. I think there's a word missing. I think it should read to give guidance to officers and decision takers in terms of assessing risks against the risk appetite. We're referring to the bottom of page 71 and the top of page 72, I believe. Mrs. Trenard, would you like to give?
Yes, I would agree. Clearly, the policy sets out the appetite, and then it is for officers to provide an assessment against that appetite for the decision.
If I may.
Yeah, so what we're saying is that actually we're not, yeah. So I think I understand Councillor Godfrey is coming from.
I think, Leader, we need to refer to the risk management policy, which does lay down that it's up to officers to assess the risks of change against our risk appetite, to identify mitigation measures and document those. And I'm sure all Cabinet colleagues will reassure us that before a paper comes before us, they have addressed the risks of any proposed course of action and challenge the mitigation measures in order to minimise that risk.
Okay. I think the core point that has been made, I think there is a question on 8, because we're not, I think Councillor Godfrey makes a point, which actually was a point I've made as well, which is we're not assessing the risk appetite. We're assessing the risk versus the appetite. And I think it needs to say that explicitly. So I would propose an amendment to that paragraph so that there is absolute clarity, because we ended up in a muddle until we made adjustment when we were talking about risk during the Central Winchester regeneration, where we went through the risk register in great detail, and the language that was used to assess the risk was inappropriate. It was not a hungry risk. There is no such thing. And I do think we need to be really clear that that is assessing risk versus risk appetite, and the document should be changed accordingly. There is a discussion to be had about what word we use to describe the level of risk, and I think we talked about it being red, amber, green in the past. I'd like clarity on that. Anyway, Cabinet, further questions? At this point, which I would like to just put on the record in response to what Councillor Godfrey said, we talked about the risk register at great length on the meeting on the 6th, went through the risk register as it was put forward to us, had a detailed discussion about the fuller dimensions of mitigation that had been put in place to manage those risks, and concluded that what we were doing was consistent with the Council's risk policy as it was agreed at the time. Councillor Power.
I would only add, Leader, that we have a duty also to assess risk against the benefits. And when we discussed CWR, was it only this week or was it last week? We were very clear on justifying that residual red risk against the benefits to be delivered, and also what would happen did we not take that step. We have to assess risk against benefits in everything we do. And that was an outlier, but I think we justified the benefits to be derived.
I think what we highlighted was that on all of the risks was that the choice of the development partner was mitigating those risks. And that was the key point of the discussion at that cabinet meeting. And it was very clear that we believed that those risks, through the choice and the decision we were making, were being mitigated. So, Cabinet, are there any other questions on this paper? Councillor Lerney.
Thank you. Not so much on the paper, but can you clarify the amendment you're proposing to make? I understand the intent, but I don't understand what the wording is going to be and where it's going to be changed.
I think on page 88, instead of assessing risk appetite, it is assessing risk versus the risk appetite, or against risk appetite.
If I may assist, Leader, I believe you're correct there, because in paragraph 2, it is very clear that the table is giving guidance to officers in terms of assessing project and decision risk against the council's risk appetite. So the matter is in the text. I believe it just needs to be an adjustment to the table. And if I gave an example, if one was to look at the main report where it says, for instance, I can just remember that the council's appetite in respect of matters of living well is, I believe, moderate. But there may be a project where, when the officer looks at the risk associated with the project, that it is a higher risk, and at that point we might be looking at a major and highly likely. You see both the vertical and horizontal lines there. So to proceed without any further consideration, that risk would need to fall within the moderate category, but on this table it would fall within hungry, and that's just what we did at CWR, Leader, in that the risks associated with those projects were higher than the council's comfortable appetite. So therefore the report indicated the mitigations that will be put in place to bring that risk back to one that was acceptable to the council, or continue to highlight the risks that were pushed it beyond our comfortable level. But as Councillor Powers just said, the benefits were worth it, and that is what the officer would do in each case. Ideally we would want the actions to comply with the risk appetite immediately, but as a bold and ambitious council working in very flexible and dynamic and challenging circumstances across a variety of factors, that's not possible. And sometimes a bolder and slightly more risky approach may be looked forward, and at that point members are assessing that and the risk mitigations put in place by using that table, which essentially brings forward the risks itself on those axes and the appetite in the middle. Leader, I'm sorry, I've indulged you in the meeting, but I believe it's the title that needs some.
That's very helpful, and the simple thing for clarity is just to say that we will take the words that are in the second paragraph and make them the headline of that section for clarity. So it says assessing project and decision risk against the council's risk appetite as that headline, in place of the words assessing risk appetite, so that there is absolute clarity about who's doing what. I think that would be a useful clarification, because there has been some confusion. Councillor Porter.
Thank you. As a cabinet member assessing risk almost every time we have a conversation, I'm very conscious that our officers need a framework under which to operate. And this is the framework that they must operate under. And it's when we, as cabinet members, challenge those because we want to do something different, that's when we're making a decision about whether the risk should be different and how we mitigate it. And that's my understanding of how we use this document. I appreciate what you're saying exactly, that perhaps possibly that a couple more words would solve that problem. But it is about the officers knowing the risks within which this council finds acceptable. And then if we're doing more, we need to find a way through that. Or if we're not taking enough risk, I think that's an equal opportunity. So I do understand, having read the paper very carefully and having had the conversations, I do understand what the role of the officer is here and what the role of us as the council, the cabinet is. And I think it's very important that Councillor Godfrey knows that that's what we understand. It is difficult to explain that in a paper to the general public and to write it down. I think I do appreciate how difficult it is. And we've looked through this so many times. I think we're beginning to almost go into it too deeply, but it is about having a normal framework under which the officers know they can work. And then we can challenge that if we wish to.
Absolutely. And the key point here is what we expect from officers is to assess risk, project and decision risk, put in place propose mitigations that deal with that risk and leave us with an acceptable residual risk. But the question of risk appetite is a policy decision and is made by Cabinet or full council, depending on the decision that's in front of us. And was an area, is an area that I think, as those of you who survived for 6 hours in Cabinet a week and a half ago, will know, was something that got a great deal of very thorough discussion. I'm also a great fan of risk registers and properly understanding risk. And I think reinforcing that point of what sits with officers and what sits with the council in its democratic sense is a critical priority in having that clarity. Any other questions on this paper? Any debate?
Peter, can I just say that I note that in the red, amber, green section, nutrient neutrality is has the highest risk of any of the council's statements. Can I just reassure all members that it's the first item in any conversation that I have, because delivering housing and homes is absolutely our priority, and the council has invested quite a lot of money in trying to find a solution to this as well, and a lot of intellectual time as well. So I think it's a really good indicator, really, of looking at this on a regular basis and being very well aware of what those risks are and keeping them in mind in any conversation in our working day.
Thank you, Councillor Porter. No, I strongly agree with you. I think it's a good example of how the use of a corporate risk register as a tool to direct our attention to those areas where we are facing higher risk, where we're facing risk that goes beyond our risk appetite, and where there needs to be focused effort in mitigation. It's a great example of how powerful and important a tool this is. So there's absolutely no question that the journey that the council has been on to improve its risk management, absolute critical priority of all parties, really since the middle of the last decade, for reasons that probably none of us particularly want to remember. But improving our risk management is a very high priority, and I think the example you've just given shows the power of the tool that we have. Anyway, debate. I'm not. Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to say that I welcome this paper, because I also welcome the level of detailed preparation and discussion that has gone into it, and the fact it's highlighted this very key area of work that we do, both as policymakers, in terms of our strategic role, but also the work that the officers do. I'm very happy to support it, notwithstanding the leader's suggested amendment. But I think it shows here today how seriously we take this and how important the work is. So I'm happy to support the paper.
Thank you very much indeed. So, Cabinet. Councillor Power, any final comments?
Thank you, Leader. So as suggested at the top of page 88, we'll change the title from Assessing Risk Appetite to Assessing Risk versus Risk Appetite. I also wish to draw to your attention that we have changed the colours on the risk register to be red, amber, green as described in the risk policy, rather than red, yellow, green, and thank Mr. Howson for his achievements in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I had actually suggested a slightly longer change, which was, that's sufficient.
Assessing risk versus risk appetite is what we're taking.
Risk against risk appetite, okay. Good, so Cabinet, subject to that amendment on page 88, so assessing risk against risk appetite, are you happy to agree the paper in front of us?
Yes.
Agreed. Agreed.
And I think that brings us to the end of the business in front of us. Can I thank officers, since this is the last Cabinet meeting of the year, can I thank officers for all the work they're doing during the course of the year, prepare for Cabinet meetings of varying lengths, but for all the work that's been done. Can I thank Cabinet colleagues also for all your hard work in ensuring that the papers are prepared and ready, and for taking them through the Council's various committees. That's also greatly appreciated. Can I thank indirectly the Scrutiny Committee and the other policy committees for the work that they do to help us improve the proposals that come before us here today, including, of course, Audit and Governance.